Today I'd like you to meditate with me on a simple proposal. Not everyone who dreams is asleep. Not everyone who dreams is asleep. T.E. Lawrence once remarked the following: everybody dreams, but not equally. Those who dream by night in the dusty recesses of their minds wake up in the day to find it was vanity. But the dreamers of the day are dangerous, for they may act their dreams with open eyes to make it possible. Now, I will certainly defer to my colleagues in the counseling center to explain to us the mechanics of dreams and dream interpretation. But I think for our purposes this morning, we can say this about dreams. Dreams, whether it is the dreams of an individual or of a people, are where we work out the margins, the parts of our thoughts that aren't a good fit for waking life, maybe because too shameful, too embarrassing, too reminiscent of wounds, but also maybe the parts that seem too fantastic, too hopeful, too naive, too incredible to find a respectable place in the real world. But what does it mean, following Lawrence, when this dreaming happens not among those who are asleep and temporarily checked out of the real world, but those who bring the margins to the center of the real world itself by dreaming while awake? I want to think with you this morning about two kinds of dreamers: the Magi who visit Jesus and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whom we commemorate today. But right at the outset, I want to acknowledge some danger in doing so. As it relates to the Magi, the danger is that we let a dream-like haze settle on the scene and miss how deeply real the setting was. Speaking for myself, I grew up in a household and a church where when the Magi came out, they were placed just off to the side of the manger scene, where the ox and the lambs and the animals surrounding, in my case, an alabaster white, perfectly gleaming, serene Mary and Jesus and Joseph. All is calm, all is bright. But the dreamy haze around that scene can lull us into false visions of what was actually going on. I'll leave aside whether or not Jesus was actually born in a manger or where exactly Jesus was when the Magi visited. Our New Testament scholars can take the heat for that one. But what we do know from the text is that the context of the visit of these mysterious kings from the east was anything but calm, anything but serene. The visit of the Magi was less Sunday school Christmas pageant and more Game of Thrones. It was a salvo in what Matthew portrays as a growing threat of violence from one ruler, a ruler so powerful the gospel names the age after him, Herod, to a potential usurper, or at least an instigator of popular revolt. We don't know exactly who the Magi were. Scholars suggest that the names assigned to them by church tradition, Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar, are likely derived from an Armenian infancy gospel written at least 4 centuries after Matthew. And then some other sources say one's from India, one's from Persia, one's from Arabia. There's an 8th century Syriac manuscript that says they're from China. It's all over the place. We don't know. Even the term magus, by the time of Matthew, was a sort of catch-all term for anyone with skills, or at least advertised skills, in what we would call magic. But whoever they were, they had enough stature, or at least enough savvy, to get an audience with Herod, and to get not only his attention, but the text tells us the attention of Jerusalem itself. And that text tells us something else. That whatever else the Magi were, they were dreamers. And their dreams were not the dreams of a hazy, peaceful Christmas-time sleep. They were dreams that woke them up to the full nature of the lengths to which Herod would go to suppress the perceived threat of that little child, meek and mild. And so they disobey Herod's orders, and they return without disclosing Jesus' exact location. But as it turns out, Matthew is not actually finished with the Magi. A lot of pastors talk about the Sunday after Christmas services as a low attendance Sunday. Maybe because the church gets so packed on Christmas Eve, but maybe too because the church's lectionary, like the Gospel of Matthew itself, immediately after the Magi's exit, plunges us into just how violent power gets when it is threatened. Joseph and Mary and Jesus have to flee, and Herod undertakes a targeted genocide. Hauntingly, the last time we hear the Magi mentioned is in Matthew 2:16, which says this: "When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, according to the time he had learned from the wise men." The Magi's dreams may have been enough to save Jesus temporarily from the violence of empire, but it could not stave off the violence for other innocent victims caught up in the lust for power. Which means, friends, that if we are in a dreamlike haze around the baby's throne at Christmas time in Epiphany, then Matthew and the church wake us up very quickly. The waking world is a world full of Herods, and is too often run by Herods. But, as we know, when it comes to maintaining power, the rulers of the waking age have two options. One is the option that Herod took: direct violence, attempting to quash rebellions by force before they start. But there's another option that power has: co-opting, domestication, adapting and incorporating a dangerous element until it becomes not only not disturbing to the status quo, but positively reinforcing of it. And that brings us to our other dreamer this morning. Growing up again, once January hit and I returned to school after my Christmas break, once the alabaster white serene manger scene was put, and its magi had been put away, within a few weeks I would learn about Dr. King. And very soon, again, a dreamlike haze would settle on the scene of a march on Washington. The scene depicted to me growing up of a beloved man speaking about his dream, a dream that highlighted the importance of love and getting along. And according to the narrative that I was taught, speaking about this dream so well that he won over the hearts and mind of the nation, and racism soon and forever came to an end in the 1970s. All is calm, all is bright. Those of us who, despite the best efforts of some state legislatures, are still able to learn the real history of the civil rights movement, know that it didn't exactly go that way. That way of telling the story is worse than a dream. It is a fantasy, and not an innocent one. The literary theorist Stephen Greenblatt once remarked that true power is the ability to impose one's fictions upon another, to make someone else live within your fiction whether they want to or not. And we might say that that too is the power of the Herods of our age, to make the incarnation of God a rosy tale of peace, and to make the struggle of king a comfortable story to reassure the status quo. As scholars, including CTS's own recently departed Dr. Rufus Burrow, remind us, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was no more a fit in the alabaster white serene status quo than were the Magi. Ironically, many of King's enemies at the time perceived something about him that whitewashed history, co-optation, domestication, makes it easy for us to forget that King was indeed dangerous. Dangerous to the powers of the waking world. He was an agitator. He was realistic about the slowness of change, but he was no incrementalist, no fan of working with the possible, as that possible was defined by those who benefit from injustice. He opposed the imperialist war in Vietnam. He spoke out in favor of the victims of Fordist and nascent neoliberal capitalism. His murder took place on a trip to support striking workers. The dream of the American status quo, or rather the fantasy of it, is that the evils against which King fought are in the past, that they do not still define American history and the American story. But buying into that dream puts us to sleep. King was a dreamer, yes, but he was not asleep. He was a dangerous dreamer. And honoring his legacy means staying awake to that fact. But not all who dream are asleep. Staying awake does not, and indeed should not, keep us from doing what dreams do, bringing the margins to the center, shining light on the hidden shames that the Herods of the waking world would like us to roll over and forget, and to bring to the center, to bring to consciousness the dreams that seem impossible, unrealistic, naive, too hopeful for the world as it is. Because let's be clear, God's dream of a world of healing, of human dignity, and love manifest in justice is not realistic. It's not a good fit with reality. But that's reality's problem, not God's. And we who come to places like CTS to explore the strange call of God upon our lives know that the reality that the Herods of the waking world who desperately want to preserve is, as shown by that very desperation, not inevitable. It is constructed. It comes from somewhere, and anything constructed can be deconstructed and built back better. A few years ago, I was told by some of my students in their class with me that they had a running contest, unbeknownst to me, betting on how many times I would call something a generative tension during a class period. Apparently, it got to the point to where they would agree to take a drink of whatever was in their mugs at the time every time I said it. I'm going to charitably assume water or coffee, but it's Zoom, I don't know. In that spirit, let me just end by saying that those of us who seek to live out God's dangerous dream, those who seek to honor the legacy of a dangerous king and a dangerous king of kings, are called to a generative tension. We're called to stay awake, to not be lulled into the fantasies of the Herods of the waking world, to not be distracted by the alabaster white status quo or realistic goals that do nothing to disrupt and deconstruct injustice. But we're also called to keep dreaming, to not let the real world define what is possible when dangerous dreamers are called into action, when people in churches and seminaries and communities deconstruct domesticated idols and rebuild, in the spirit of all the saints that have come before us, a world that better reflects God's own dream. So stay awake, friends, but keep dreaming. Amen.